There are an insane amount of isekai anime these days, and they're all finding some way to stand out. What if the protagonist was overpowered? What if they weren't overpowered? What if they were overworked in the isekai? What if they chilled out? And those were just examples from this year. But what a lot of these shows end up lacking is a visual hook. Kadokawa, the largest publisher of isekai light novels, has sworn to create 40 anime every year henceforth, and that's tightened the belts of a lot of anime's already strict schedules. Having great animation is already a task and a half, let alone developing a unique visual identity. But I'd argue that time I got reincarnated as a slime isn't just a successful example of an isekai with great animation, but one that is immediately recognizable with just one look. I'll admit, I love this show. Sure, there are plenty of anime that I could cover with better animation, but there's so much charming slime that I want to spend my time making a case for it. To put this up front, there are absolutely episodes of Slime with basically no movement at all. It's a show with a lot of talking, and those scenes rarely end up getting the same kind of attention as the numerous fight scenes. But what's important is that the scaffold is there, and it means that whether there's a lot of animation or not, the poses and artwork stand out and are able to deliver a compelling story. For instance, there's our lovable protagonist. In an industry where isekai anime is often based in cynicism, Rimuru is joyful, and that's a big part of how he's animated as well, in both forms.
はじめまして、俺はスライムのリムル。悪いスライムじゃないよ。
His human form was designed by Ryoma Ibata, a famed animator in his own right, and one of the biggest factors behind how these characters move. His style of animation is sharp and elegant, but he can't animate the whole show, and in fact, he's not all that involved in animation supervision. Instead, he's got to express everything within the designs themselves. But of course, this is an adaptation, and in Slime's case, while it was originally a web novel and then a light novel, most people know it as a manga and already have a specific idea of what these guys should look like. Ibata is a fan of all versions of Slime, and so he consulted both the light novel and manga illustrators with the goal of creating a fusion of their work that would still animate in an interesting way. The result is totally different from either of them. One of the best ways to achieve consistent animation is by creating designs that express a lot about the character with the least amount of lines. That way, animators won't take forever drawing each frame. And in that respect, Ibata succeeded. Rimuru may look different from his original portrayals, but he's still got all the same characteristics and gives off that same kind of impression. Ibata doesn't animate all that much for the show, especially these days, but what he does do is direct, storyboard and key animate the openings entirely by himself. For him, this is his opportunity for total creative freedom. It's not about realizing someone else's scene or adapting it from the manga. It's about making a unique 90-second music video with all of his character designs. It's something he does for basically every show he's involved in. The ending of Celestial Method, the opening for Shonen Maids, the ending of Rewrite, the opening of Absolute Duo. And because he animates these himself, they always have their own unique energy to them. And in doing so, he's using animation to introduce the personalities of these characters, and first impressions stick. I imagine having this visual reference also helps other animators who join the show later on to get a feel of all the ways in which these characters swagger. And on that note, this specific kind of walking animation is something signature to Ibata, and he's been working on it for years, constantly improving on it, and for many people it sums up his approach. Even the most basic of movements always has to have some flair to it. And so it becomes the job of the animation directors across the show to balance his vision for the characters with each individual animator's skills. Ebata is a big factor in building Slime's visual personality, but it's important to note that he was only responsible for the human designs. This is a show about a community of monsters, and so suddenly, the role of monster designer is a much bigger deal. To be honest, they're technically all monsters, so while Ebata designed the more human-looking characters, it was monster designer Takehiro Kishida that handled stuff like the goblins and lizard men. But perhaps his biggest masterpiece was the one that took the least amount of work, Rimuru's slime form. Yeah, he's just a circle, but a circle has limitless possibilities, and it's the easiest thing to animate. In fact, one of the first lessons animators learn is the bouncing ball exercise, where you draw out the arc of a ball bouncing along the ground. It teaches several fundamentals without being challenging to draw. So with that in mind, Kishida only drew out 2 design boards for Rimuru, and instead decided to let animators decide their own shapes for this limitless blob. So one animator comes up with the idea of having him exclaim with his own body, others give his eyes a different shape, and so over time, Rimuru's design sheets get longer and longer. In the end, the only real challenge was making sure Rimuru was always in frame. That's the reason Shion's always carrying him around, and why you always find him on random elevated objects. The storyboard artists are just trying to keep him in the shot. They had a lot to learn throughout the first season, but those lessons ended up benefiting the Slime Diaries spin-off, and now the second season as well. A lot of anime these days end up being sent off to other studios between seasons, and it forces the new staff to start from scratch and have to relearn how to make these characters move. But while assistant director Atsushi Nakayama took over for Slime's second season, it's still much of the same team, and a lot of Slime veterans continued to work on the Slime Diaries spin-off as well. All those lessons that they learned in 2018 have persisted today, and thanks to a business alliance with Bandai Namco Arts, this team will continue to create the show into the future.
せーの、バンダイナムコ。
But I want to dial back a bit and specifically break down the very first episode of Slime, because this is where they had to make the big decisions. To recap, this is the episode where Satoru Mikami gets stabbed, reincarnates as a slime, discovers his powers, and meets Veldora. Personally, I think it's a great first step. A lot of shows start out with great animation, but not many entrust that great animation onto one singular animator. Episode 1 was entirely key animated by animator Masaru Yonezawa, with help from Ebata as chief animation director, and so it was him that ended up discovering a lot of the new ways in which Rimuru's slime form could be animated. The episode starts out with our only glimpse at human characters, this being the real world forms, and you can already see Ebata's philosophy with the natural character animation and the slight swagger to the walk. The bit where he gets stabbed and the assailant runs away is also really naturalistic and grounded, creating a deliberate clash between reality and fantasy. But here's the problem. Once Satoru dies, the novel calls for a reincarnation that involves Rimuru slowly coming to his senses, hearing the voice of the great sage, and eventually discovering that he's become a slime. It's easy to do in prose, you just say what's happening, and the manga did a pretty good job too, using black space to great effect. But anime is all about moving visuals, and they worried that if the screen was black, people would think their TVs were broken. So instead, they approached the studio's CG producer, Yuji Haibara, who also happened to be an accomplished motion graphics artist. And his approach has become a major part of the show, because now the Great Sage has a visual presence, and it can change every time they want to show off some new text. Bright colours, vibrant effects, it works in that it feels otherworldly. Henceforth, they could have just used the voiceover whenever Rimuru gains a new skill, but the Great Sage's lines are now an excuse to show off some cool motion graphics. Episode 1 is filled with digital effects, and it really ties into this idea of rediscovering your senses. He's not quite used to seeing things in 2D yet, and he doesn't recognize his own body. Much like Rimuru himself, this episode was all about discovering what was possible with the animation, and so also like Rimuru, it felt like the creators were just having fun with it. Masaru Yonezawa's slime motions were addictive, squashing and stretching all over the place. The manga had already come up with a few visual ideas, but this episode burst them wide open. Slime has kind of become a flagship for Studio 8-bit, and I believe that it's partly the studio's approach that has made this possible. According to studio founder and former president Tsutomu Kasai, they will only take on work when they know that the right people are available to make it. For instance, they said that they wouldn't have agreed to make Encouragement of Climb if he couldn't get his desired director and character designer. It's this trust in the team that's likely the reason for so many creators sticking it out for so long. Kazuki Akane may have never gotten the amount of episodes he wanted for Stars Align, but it was 8-bit that got his pitch greenlit in the first place. And Slime's director is perhaps one of the most trusted at Studio 8-bit. Before starting this new studio, Tsutomu Kasai worked as a producer at Satellite, working alongside Shoji Kawamori on Macross and Aquarian. But when he left, Macross Frontier co-director Yasuhito Kikuchi joined him, directing their debut show Infinite Stratos before working on Busou Shinki with Ryoma Abata, and later Comet Lucifer and Slime. 8-bit leadership recognizes that it's worth investing in your staff and freelance partners, but sadly that's not true across the whole industry. Kasai recognized that the industry was not in a good place, and so the company offers study sessions to both animators employed at the company and the freelancers they work with. Right now, there's an animator shortage and a lack of training for entry-level positions. Animators want to learn how to draw better and faster to build a career, but those resources are often difficult to come by. In-house training is really valuable. Rimuru has come a long way. Sure, the manga was already popular, but now it's a franchise, and this team has managed to keep it constantly visually exciting. I mentioned Yuji Haibara before as the 3D CG and motion graphics aficionado, but he was also hired to direct the Slime Diaries. It's a different take on the original show, and while it doesn't have a lot of the bombastic action scenes, it's well directed and has plenty of well animated scenes that get us to feel closer to the characters. It has an entirely different emphasis, but the smoother animation works in its favour. I had no idea that this 3D artist could direct 2D shows, but clearly he had even more hidden talents that we weren't aware of. In comparison, part 2 of season 2 has been a bit of a letdown regarding the consistency of animation, but it still managed to pull together some great moments. After solo key animating episodes 1 and 7 of the first season, Masaru Yonezawa returned for episode 37. The return of the second core of season 2. Much like how he animated Rimuru and Veldora meeting for the first time, he was there yet again to animate their reunion. At the time, Veldora was too complex to properly animate, but now he doesn't stop moving. You would think that if you were animating an episode by yourself, you'd focus on efficiency, just getting the main motions down, but 37 is filled with a bunch of fun details. Rimuru and Veldora are bosom buddies, and so they've been animated in a very familiar way, despite having never been together in these forms before. It's a genuinely heartwarming episode, because between the dialogue and the animation, they enjoy being around each other. But Yonezawa went even further. During the party, the crowds don't stop moving, making Tempest feel like an even more enjoyable place to be. There's also plenty of smaller details, like the dragon newts nodding along outside the window, or a goblin getting so excited that they throw their baby into the air. I love this show. Maybe I've been exaggerating how good the animation is, but I don't think so. The main Slime series has a sharp and dynamic appeal, where action will bounce across the screen at impossible speeds. Animation and storytelling are intrinsically linked, so even though there's not all that many frames and the movements are rarely smooth, we can understand what they're going for, and it's immensely satisfying. In a recent episode, Veldora unleashed a bunch of Street Fighter moves and a kamehameha that you can absolutely tell the animators loved drawing. And it works for characterization as well. Ebata's designs combined with the storyboards and character animation have turned this into an incredibly lovable cast. When Tempest got attacked in season 2, I genuinely stopped watching the show for a few weeks before I could muster up the courage to continue. It hurts more to see them get hurt, not just because of the writing, but also because you love to see their expressions and poses. It makes them feel alive. I'm a big fan of Gabiru, but I'm not sure I would be if he just stood still and talked. We're now set for a That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime movie, coming next year, and that likely means that we can expect to see more of the highlights of the show and less of the still frames. It's incredibly exciting. Isekai anime can feel a dime a dozen lately, but I appreciate that the teams at 8-bit have consistently given me something to look forward to throughout 2021 and now 2022 as well. This is my comfort food, my warm and cozy isekai. Sure, Rimuru did a genocide, but it was for wholesome reasons. And so I'm just happy that these characters will keep me smiling for years to come. Thanks for watching The Canipa Effect. It's been so fun to make a video about one of my favourite shows as of late. It also won Anime of the Season at the Anime Trending Awards, so I'm happy to hear that there are more people that love it just as much as I do. But before I go, I'd like to thank these incredible people for supporting the channel. In particular, I'd like to thank Austin Hardwick, Dedameat, Eddie Laheka, Edwin Shale, Faux Wizard, Frizzy Canadian, Frogkun, Fujay, Jacob Bosley, JR Pictures, My Own Mother, Naylor Drink, Nolan Soga, Quentin Elkin Smith, Ryan Taylor, and Toma Rahman.